When God restores you, one of the first and most profound signs is the quiet birth of a new humility. It is not a humility that seeks to be noticed or praised. It is not about saying, I am nothing, while secretly hoping to be reassured. It is something deeper, something more honest. It is the recognition that all we have, all we are, and all we hope to become is a gift. This humility does not come from shame. It comes from mercy. It is what happens when a person has stood face to face with their own weakness and instead of being condemned, has been embraced by God. When someone has fallen low, perhaps in sin, in despair, or in failure, and instead of being rejected, they are lifted up by the gentle hand of the Lord. The heart begins to change. You realize you did not earn your way back. You were carried, you were loved before you deserved it, and even when you still don't. It is like the tax collector in the Gospel who stood at the back of the temple, unable to raise his eyes to heaven. He did not compare himself to others. He simply said, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus said, he went home justified. God does not restore us so we can stand tall before others. He restores us so we can kneel in truth before Him. There is nothing more beautiful, more human, than a soul that knows it needs God. This humility opens your eyes. You begin to see others differently. You no longer think of yourself as higher or better. You begin to understand the burdens others carry, the silent battles they fight. You speak less, listen more. You become slower to judge and quicker to forgive. Your words become gentler. There is a softening of the heart. Humility also changes how you handle your own story. You no longer hide your wounds as if they disqualify you. Instead, you allow them to witness to grace. You can say, yes, I was broken. Yes, I was lost. But the Lord found me. You are not ashamed to speak of your past because you know it is not the end of the story. You know now that your weakness was the very door through which God entered your life. There is also a new kind of strength that comes with humility. Not the strength of control or domination, but the strength to serve. When your heart has been humbled by love, you begin to prefer the lower place. You do not need to be seen, to be first, or to win. You find joy in helping others succeed. You bend down like Jesus, who watched his disciples' feet, because love always kneels before it lifts. And perhaps most mysteriously of all, humility makes room for God. Pride fills the heart with the self, but humility empties it and creates space for grace. God is not impressed by our accomplishments. He is not moved by our masks, but He is drawn to the humble. Scripture says, He resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When you are humble, God draws close. He feels at home in your heart. This humility, born out of restoration, does not fade easily. It stays with you. It becomes your posture in prayer, your tone in conversation, your manner in suffering. You no longer rush to defend yourself or seek to justify every mistake. You simply return to the truth that you are loved, deeply, undeservedly, and eternally. And that changes everything. When God restores you, another sign that quietly takes root in your soul is a new kind of joy, not loud or boastful, but still and deep. It is not the joy that comes from having everything go right in your life. nor the excitement that fades with time. This joy is quieter than happiness, but far more lasting. It is the joy of knowing you are loved by God, even when life remains imperfect. This joy does not shout or demand attention. It does not need to be posted or shared for approval. It often arrives gently, almost unnoticed, like the morning light through a window. It comes in moments of peace, when you are alone and not lonely, when you sit in prayer and feel the warmth of God's presence, when you look back at the pain you once carried. When God restores the soul, joy no longer depends on circumstances. Before, joy might have come only when things were going well, when we were praised, when we succeeded, when life seemed under control, but that kind of joy is fragile. It disappears quickly when storms come. What God offers in restoration is something deeper. It is the joy of being found, the joy of knowing that even in your mess and in your worst moments, you are not abandoned. This joy is born in gratitude. You begin to see how much you have been given, not in terms of material wealth, but in grace. Every breath becomes a gift. Every second chance becomes a song of thanksgiving. The small things, the laughter of a child, the kindness of a stranger, the silence of early morning, are no longer overlooked. They become sacraments of God's goodness, reminders that He is near. The joy of the restored is also free of competition. You are no longer driven by envy, no longer crushed when others succeed. There is a calm in your heart because you are secure in God's love. Your worth no longer depends on your achievements or on being noticed. You are content to be small in the eyes of the world because you know you are precious in the eyes of the Father. And this quiet joy gives you strength. Not the strength to overpower, but the strength to endure. In suffering it remains like a steady flame. In darkness it gives light. It doesn't deny pain or cover up sorrow, but it lives alongside them. Like Mary at the foot of the cross, joy can exist even in the shadow of grief, because it is rooted in something eternal. It is not a denial of suffering. It is a defiance of this kind of joy is also contagious, not in a dramatic or flashy way, but like a perfume that lingers in the air. People may not be able to name it, but they sense something different. You laugh more easily. You complain less. You carry peace in your presence. And without even trying, you become a witness to the goodness of God. Not through sermons or arguments, but simply by the way you live. When you are restored by God, you begin to rejoice not only in what He has done for you, but in what He is doing in others. You celebrate healing wherever it appears. You rejoice in goodness, even when it does not directly benefit you. And in all of this, you begin to understand that joy is not something you chase, it is something you welcome. It comes not when you grasp for it, but when you rest in the love of God. A love that does not leave you as you are, but patiently restores you. And with that restoration, fills you with a joy that the world cannot give and the world cannot take away. When God restores your heart, one of the clearest signs is that you begin to live differently with others. Your relationships are no longer shaped by resentment, judgment, or revenge. Instead, they begin to be marked by forgiveness, not because others have changed, but because you have. When the mercy of God has touched you deeply, it becomes impossible to withhold that mercy from others. You forgive not out of obligation, but because you remember what it was like to be forgiven yourself. This forgiveness does not come from a place of superiority. It does not say, I forgive because I am better. He says, I forgive because I understand. You begin to see how easy it is to fall, how complex and fragile the human heart is. You no longer divide the world into good people and bad people. You begin to see that we are all, in different ways, broken and beloved at the same time. When God lifts you out of a place of guilt or despair, you realize how patient He has been with you. You remember the countless times you turned away, and yet He waited. You remember the shame you carried, and how gently He spoke to you. You remember the times when you deserved punishment, but received grace instead. That memory softens your heart. It opens your eyes to the pain of others. It makes you slower to judge and quicker to show mercy. Forgiveness does not mean pretending that the wrong never happened. It is not about forgetting or minimizing the harm done. Real forgiveness acknowledges the truth. It looks at the wound. It names the injustice. But then it chooses to let go of the right to retaliate. It says, this hurt me, but I will not pass the pain on. I choose peace. That choice is not weakness. It is one of the strongest acts a person can make. When you are restored by God, you start to desire restoration for others too. You want others to be free, not punished. You want reconciliation, not vengeance. Even when someone has not apologized, even when they are still distant, your heart does not grow bitter. You may still need to protect your boundaries, to speak truthfully, to grieve, but you do not let the wound define you. You hand it to God and ask Him to heal both you and the one who hurt you. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. When you look back and see the harm you have caused, the words you cannot unsay, the opportunities you wasted, the people you failed, it can be difficult to accept that you are still worthy of love. But God's restoration includes that too. He does not merely repair your outer life. He speaks peace into your soul. He says, you are not your worst moment. You are mine. And as you accept His forgiveness, you begin to treat yourself with more compassion. You stop punishing yourself for what God has already covered in grace. The spirit of forgiveness also changes how you pray. You begin to bring others to God not with anger or accusations, but with hope. Even those who have wronged you become part of your intercession. You ask God to bless them, to heal them, to draw them close. And in doing so, your heart becomes lighter. The chains of resentment fall away. You are no longer trapped in the pain of the past. You are free. This is the power of restoration. It does not only make you whole, it makes you an instrument of peace. You become someone who interrupts cycles of hatred, someone who lives with an open heart. The mercy you receive becomes the mercy you give, and slowly, quietly, the world around you begins to change. Not because others became perfect, but because God restored you, and through you, He is restoring others. When God restores you, something begins to stir in your soul that wasn't there before. Or perhaps it was buried for a long time. It is a hunger, not for things of the world, not for recognition or control, but for holiness. This hunger is gentle but insistent. It begins with a longing for more of God, not just to know about Him, but to be close to Him, to walk with Him, to live in a way that reflects His love. You realize that you are not created merely to survive or to succeed, but to become holy. This hunger is not about appearing religious or following rules with cold precision. It is not about performance, it is about love. When you have encountered the mercy of God in a personal and transformative way, you begin to desire the things that please Him, not because you fear punishment, but because you love the one who saved you. Holiness becomes less about perfection and more about belonging. You want your life to say yes to God in every way. You begin to seek His presence in places you once overlooked. Scripture no longer feels like a duty, but a window. Prayer becomes not just a list of requests, but a conversation with someone who knows you completely and loves you still. You begin to hunger for silence, for stillness, for moments when the noise of the world fades and only the voice of God remains. Even when you don't have the words, your heart finds rest in simply being with Him. This hunger also changes your view of sin. What once seemed harmless or even desirable now feels like a barrier. Not because you are becoming self-righteous, but because you recognize that sin separates you from the joy of communion with God. You begin to guard your thoughts, your speech, your habits, not out of fear, but because you treasure your relationship with Him. Holiness becomes a kind of freedom, a way of living that allows you to walk in peace and love. You also begin to notice a growing sensitivity to the needs and dignity of others. Holiness is not isolation. It draws you outward. The more you seek God, the more you recognize His presence in the poor, the suffering, the forgotten. You begin to care more deeply, to serve more willingly, to love more purely. Holiness is never selfish. It always makes room for others. It makes you kinder, more patient, more humble. This hunger for holiness brings clarity. You begin to see what truly matters. The things that once captivated you, possessions, approval, start to lose their grip. They seem small in the light of eternity. Your heart becomes anchored in something deeper. You are not easily shaken by trials or temptations because your focus is no longer scattered. You know who you are. There will still be struggles. The journey to holiness is not a straight path. You will stumble, you will grow tired, but even in your weakness, you will feel the pull of grace urging you onward. You will find strength, not in your own willpower, but in God's faithfulness. He does not abandon the soul that desires Him. He walks with you step by step, even when you cannot see the way clearly. And as this hunger grows, you begin to taste its fruit: peace, patience, gentleness, joy, not as fleeting emotions, but as a steady presence in your life. You realize holiness is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming the person God created you to be. The more you say yes to Him, the more your life reflects His image. And in this quiet transformation, your hunger is not only satisfied, it deepens. Because the more you receive of God, the more you desire Him. And this desire, this hunger, becomes the very sign that your heart is being restored. When God restores you, something profound changes in how you see others, especially those who are poor, broken, or forgotten. Your heart becomes softer, more open. You begin to see people not with the eyes of the world, but with the eyes of Christ. You see the wounded, the rejected, the ones who live on the margins, and instead of looking away, you draw near. This is not something you force. It flows naturally from the healing you have received. When you have been touched by God's mercy, you can no longer be indifferent to the suffering of others. You recognize your own story in their pain. Maybe you were not materially poor, but you were spiritually empty. Maybe you were not on the streets, but you were lost inside. And God found you. He came close. He lifted you when no one else could. That memory shapes the way you look at others now. You know what it means to be seen, to be restored, so you begin to offer that same compassion to others. You start noticing people you once passed by. The homeless man at the corner is no longer invisible. The elderly woman sitting alone in the church is no longer just a stranger. The single mother struggling with her child is no longer someone you judge. You begin to understand that love is not abstract, it is specific, it is personal, it moves toward those in need, even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. The shift doesn't require wealth or power, it requires presence. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is simply to sit with someone in their pain, to listen without fixing, to show them they are not alone. When God restores your heart, He does not do so only for your benefit. He restores you so that you can become a source of healing for others. You become His hands and feet, His voice, His presence, in a world that is often cold and indifferent. This heart for the poor is not limited to material poverty. It includes the spiritually lost, the emotionally exhausted, the socially excluded. You begin to recognize how many people are carrying invisible burdens: grief, fear, addiction, shame. And instead of criticizing or distancing yourself, your instinct becomes one of closeness and tenderness. You want to lift, not to correct. You want to love, not to judge. You also begin to see injustice more clearly. When God opens your eyes, you notice systems that oppress, voices that are silenced, doors that remain closed for the vulnerable. Restoration brings with it a holy restlessness. You cannot remain passive when others are suffering, whether through prayer, service, advocacy, or small acts of kindness. You begin to live with a sense of responsibility, not because you are a savior, but because you are a disciple. This heart for the poor is not about pity. It is about dignity. You begin to understand that every person, no matter how broken, carries the image of God. And when you honor that image, when you listen, serve, defend, or simply accompany, you are not just doing a good deed. You are encountering Christ Himself. Whatever you did for the least of this, He said, you did for me. In the face of the poor, we meet the Lord. Over time, this way of seeing becomes a way of living. It affects your choices, your priorities, your prayers. You become less attached to things and more attached to people. You become less impressed by status and more drawn to sincerity. You find joy not in comfort, but in compassion. And even when it costs you something, you give freely, because you remember the day God found you in your poverty and clothed you in mercy. This is the fruit of true restoration, a heart that beats with the rhythm of God's love, a love that always moves toward the lowly, the forgotten, and the broken. And when that love lives in you, you become not only restored, but a restorer.